generations of scientists and engineers in the past have proclaimed that a fundamental change for the future of mobility would be on its way, but so far this simply has not happened. Is there any good reason to believe that such a change will occur in the next few decades, and what evidence is there to support that? Who would like to respond to that question first? What is different now what do we know now, what do we have now at our disposal that we didn't have a decade ago, 2 decades ago, that is going to make the tremendous difference and turn things around? Anyone wish to comment on that?
Yeah, maybe I think the main difference today could be that we are going from this individualized mobility to more social mobility, and this is what Optimism Project was about. Thinking about ITC solutions, how they are going to change behavior and which new solutions they are going to offer. We can see it in the daily lives that these technologies are changing behavior and changing the way on how we do appointments, how we meet, how we work, and I guess this is one good reason why we could expect there's something going on and something changing in mobility as well.
I would say both yes and no, because for developing countries, for example, it follows the similar pattern. I mean, so for them, I think it's not changing from today to tomorrow. And yes, it's changing with smartphones, widespread usage of internet, you know, and since the transport is an intermediate product, it's not the final product. Since the consumption and production patterns changes or daily lives changes, also the mobility patterns will change in the near future.
I think the premise on which this question is based takes a very short-run view of history. Actually, I think mobility has changed through the generations, and the patterns of mobility have changed very remarkably. Partially they've been driven by major changes in technology, so cars replaced horses for oddly environmental reasons in cities once upon a time.
Okay, perhaps the question, excuse me, wasn't phrased properly. There has been change, but I suppose it's a change towards some sort of sustainable system.
Well, if we can produce something which has manifest benefits which people recognize over the current system, then it will get adopted and produce change. And that's happened all the way through history. Things have either been quicker or more convenient, or can carry heavier loads, or whatever it might be. If we can produce a new system somehow which clearly has, for the large numbers of people, benefits over the existing system, then it will change.
Yeah, there's clearly been a great deal of change. I guess the real question is the idea of us having the sort of clean, socially supportive and efficient, high-quality transport, because there is obviously concerns about pollution, environmental damage, and lack of efficiency and cost. I guess this project does have an optimistic focus. It's built into its name. There's the idea of, you know, what can we do if we try to tackle this and make this work. Today we've heard from a number of speakers concerns about political will, concerns about legal barriers that we may be confronting in the world of ICT, even if the technology may be supportive in itself. I guess the question is, what evidence is there to support an idea of a successful paradigm change towards sustainable mobility? Any further thoughts on that before we move to the questions from the audience? There are a lot of other really interesting questions that we had for this session lined up, but unfortunately we simply don't have the time, and I think it's very important that we do get some input from the audience. So if I may, I'll open the floor now to questions, and I'd please ask you to put your what you have to say in the form of a question and try to make it as compact out of respect for time, and direct it to someone on the panel. questions?
Hi, it's Sunil Mayer from Coventry University Enterprises Limited. I just wanted to ask Mr. Cavaliero, how are you able to encourage a collaborative approach in intermodal ticketing between different providers? How are you able to do that? In your presentation you had that there.
We need to have a new studies on zoning and ticketing. I hope that due to the necessity of implementation of the regulation 1370, that will be the motive to change the actual status. Because to change what is in practice, and that what is in practice has 11 years, was drawn due to the subway, will benefit, of course, one companies and will prejudice other companies. So we need to revise all the matters at the same time. That's the only way I see I can have it.
If you're thinking about your question, then I'll pose mine while you come up with yours. Just raise your hand if you do have a question. Otherwise, meanwhile, I will pose one of my own. That being focusing on active mobility, if you were. Active transport, here we're talking about walking and cycling. We've heard quite a bit about the potential there, the importance of cycling. It's also important for well-being and health of citizens. What sort of potential do you see for active mobility? And we're talking here about cycling and walking, forms that maybe do not involve cars, in your vision of sustainable mobility moving forward. What sort of potential is there in that aspect? Anyone like to comment on that? Yes.
In Portugal, we started with sustainable mobility by cycling. But I believe there's a confusion in people because they don't see cycling as a way of transportation to their jobs. It's a kind of health matter. It's recreational. And I think it's needed an education because to use the bicycle to go to the job, it's a complementary to public transportation. I believe that's the solution. And the other matter, or the other way of seeing it, is on the weekend or by the end of the day to do some sports. Within this OPTIMISM group, I believe it's to make the integration of cycling with public transport. That's the important thing.
Any further comments? Otherwise, we have a question from the audience.
I would pose a question on your question. Isn't it strange that we have to think about something as natural as walking, which is a basic form of human mobility, and asking for the potential for this? So maybe we should ask how did we come to this? Avoiding walking and what is wrong with our environment that we don't feel it's somehow it's basic movement in walking, and we are asking about potential. So we had this speech about the sustainable city, so maybe we should think back from also having a critical look on all these concepts of density, urban density and so on. Maybe this is not the environment we would like to walk around, so maybe we should have to go back asking us why did we start to avoid walking that way, and what kind of potential we have to go back to another style of living, not only moving but living, which would include walking.
In infrastructure playing a role there as well, the way that urban planning. Also we heard from Michael Kramer today talking about behavioral aspects, where he rides his bike and his friend doesn't have time to meet him because he's too busy going to the fitness studio. Or my young son asking me why there are no sidewalks in an American town that we visited recently. And of course, we've all probably seen Steve Martin or another comedian, American comedian, driving from one house to the next as opposed to just walking over to the neighbor's house. There's a behavioral pattern that has to be undermined there. So, yes, we have a question.
Thanks. Andre Woodcock from Coventry University. This might link into what you've been saying already. A few of you mentioned the role of education. So what do primary and secondary schools do at the moment in terms of policy and curriculum to help future citizens become more sustainable users?
Are you directing that to any particular person?
Anyone at all.
Anyone feel
I
comfortable
believe there's
responding?
no any program in Portugal. I don't know any program for children. One thing is literacy. Other thing is education.
David?
I talk
Sorry.
about education, not literacy. It's social education.
David, you want to?
On a very limited way, I've actually been involved in policies to try and do this. I mean, there's a policy which covered primary education in the UK called the Walking Bus Initiative, which was a means of trying to make collective walking to school fun and safe. It failed because people's habits went back. It failed in the winter particularly because the weather was lousy and it was easier to get into cars. But most of all, I think it failed because the tiny bit of resources and sustainable funding that might have kept the strategy, the policy going, just disappeared. But it was, there are ways, I think there are ways of doing it. On the previous question, the answer to why people don't walk in cities is, as much as they might, is easy. I know it's hot, but try walking around Dubai one day, or Abu Dhabi, or any reasonable sized American city, and you will see instantly that years of designing cities to revolve around cars has made lots of spaces in our cities totally unwalkable or uncyclable. And it's too dangerous.
Yes, here.
Just a little comment on these walking buses. I've just came from Munich and a big walking conference there, Walk 21, and it might not be successful in the UK, but many other places have adopted this walking bus project and program, and it's quite successful actually.
And I know it rains in Munich.
Other comments, questions at this point? Well, we could move over to the conclusions. We do have half an hour, I think, left on our program. I want to thank all of our panelists for contributing this afternoon. I'm sorry that we have run into these sorts of time constraints, but Susan, David, Francesco, Joachim, Merja, and Mert, thank you all very much for joining us. And I guess we will move on to the conclusions. We don't want to lead this off. This is what I felt was very important, that we have to leave time for the conclusions of this event and of the project as a whole. Otherwise, I wouldn't be fulfilling my duties. So, thank you all very much.
As we are moving on to the conclusions of this event, I would also invite my other two colleagues, Arno and Martin, to join the panel. David Morris will lead this session. You have the floor.
I confess, and first of all, thank you for staying this long. I know the temptations of Brussels may be greater than this particular session. I've been selected or invited, nominated, or in true army style, everybody else took a step back when volunteers were asked for, and I wasn't quite quick enough. So I've been asked to introduce this session. It is even more difficult to do than I thought it was going to be. That is a tribute or a comment in itself, or a conclusion itself, both about the difficulty and complexity and breadth of the topic, but also the sheer richness of all the contributions that we've had. I mean, the range of things which we've heard about today is so enormous that I don't think I'm going to be capable, even with the help of 2 or 3 of my colleagues who have fed me notes. I asked for half a page of notes from each of them that I might have had the chance in the 30 seconds I got to try and pull them together, but I've not really had that chance. But to pull all that together in the form of conclusions, I think is going to be too hard. In any case, one of the things a project like Optimism inevitably ends in doing, and of course all projects do because we all suggest further areas of research which somebody might like to fund, and only we are able to carry this research out effectively because only we have done this project, hopefully. We all do that. But inevitably, I suspect projects like this do raise more questions than we have answers or conclusions for. We should remember, perhaps, in all the pessimism, and I take the first question that the panel was asked a short while ago as being one of pessimism. What makes you think that this moment in time is different? My challenge to that is, change has always been the order of the day in transport systems. Usually change doesn't happen in a kind of regular, ordered way. There is something that occurs, which makes another generation of change happen. Now, it may be a social or an economic or a technological change, but something comes along. There is a wonderful book which explores this, at least the first chapter does, my chapter of course, which explores changes in the automotive industry and what the major shifts have been and what has led to the continuing success of the automotive industry in the face of, in fact, enormous changes, which actually argues that the pressure for more environmentally stable or sustainable vehicles is what will actually sustain the automotive vehicle industry for the next generation. So that the innovation has been in leaner engines, lighter weight construction, which is where the short-term gains are, but will be in, packing the car with less technology around comfort, but more around fuel saving, personalized travel systems and all that kind of thing. So life is changing, whether it's changing fast enough in all the directions we would necessarily want, but it has changed, and I would be more optimistic. Change is often about timing rather than whether it's going to happen or not. So when the time is right, unfortunately, we may only know after it's hit us rather than be able to forecast it before. But I've got 3 key points, I think, which my colleagues have reminded me of, and the days reminded me of, before I pass questions over to the panel. I think these 3 key points are fairly straightforward, although to state, but very difficult, in fact, to know precisely what follows. This is beyond the point which I think, and somebody who organised the sessions brilliantly in terms of the follow-up to mine, that a lot of this is about cities and not countries and not regions. And that is from all the data suggests that if you have limited resources, then the city is the kind of entity to go for. But cities are all different. It's not necessarily the case what works in a Porto or Zurich will work in London or Berlin. But there are enough commonalities and enough common lessons and enough common problems to make some experience transferable. But leaving that point aside, the three major things which I think have come out for me and my colleagues, this is just not me, is firstly that we need to actively transform the system. It's not going to change on its own. So there is a room for research, strategy formulation, political activity and policy, that indeed what might be the factor which is about to change here is not a social or economic or technological one, but is there the political will for change? And will the political system and politicians resist all the arguments against change and actually have the long-run courage to begin to push this agenda forward? Because I guess deep in our hearts we all know it's the right set of aims and objectives. If we look at what's happened on some of the graphs in terms of greenhouse gases, emissions, pollution, in terms of other sectors of the economy than transport, the gains have been enormous in terms of reductions in greenhouse gases. Cities are infinitely cleaner places than they were 20, 30 years ago, and we tend to forget that. So I think that it may well be that political, and a lot of that was driven through political will. Energy companies, I can promise you, did not clean themselves up because they thought it would be a good idea. They cleaned themselves up because they were told to clean themselves up, otherwise they'd lose their licenses. I mean, it was fairly much as crude as that. So there needs to be that active transformation by businesses, but particularly I think political will is important. The second point is that we need innovation in all fields, social, economical, technical, institutional, whatever it is. And having said that, then the obvious corollary to that statement is it needs to be joined up. And we need it, we can't let ourselves down in one area and hope that the others will hold up or compensate. They will not. It is a multi-dimensional, multifaceted, whatever you want to call it issue. And the third area that seems to be very much there is having established the case that we need to take action, rather than talk about it all the time, we need to take action on a lot of kind of areas of this problem. We need to anticipate the future as best we can. We do need to innovate. Innovation is a powerful driver. We don't know necessarily always which innovations are going to be successful, which are going to be unsuccessful. We have never known that. We can all remind ourselves of the days when the founders of the biggest computer company in the world, IBM, I think it was, said they had room for about 5 computers in the UK. I suspect there isn't a person in this room who doesn't own less than 5 personally these days. It might be slightly different animals than the ones then, but essentially, each of those 5 is probably more powerful than any one of those 5 was in the past. I was reminded of this when I was in Manchester recently, going around the wonderful Museum of Science Technology, when one of the 5 originals is sitting there, Atlas. So anticipate, innovate. We also have to encourage change. As an economist and a behavioral economist, I suppose I believe in the power of incentives, and economic incentives in particular, to induce change. So economic incentives, but there may be other incentives that can be there. Good old moral suasion and education, looking for a greater spirit of social responsibility and collective action may all be ways in which we can encourage this. But on the other hand, we also need to have fairly strong elements of control. There's good evidence, even in the very limited area which I work on in terms of consumer information, is that consumers will react better and more consistently to mandatory information than they will to voluntary information. So if you say, don't go down that road because there's an accident, by and large, people won't. If they say, there's an accident, a lot of people might still carry on. So, you know, there will have to be elements of control. There is a need for concerted, long-run, clear policy. I mean, it's great to know that walking buses have worked in Munich. My feeling in the UK is they did fail because they were a short-run initiative, and after the buzz and the local press had been round photographing them and all the rest of it, they kind of faded away, which is a pity. It was a good idea. And it was catching the consumers, travel consumers of the future when they were young, in what was essentially a fun, collective, social activity. We do need planning, and pretty sophisticated planning. We do need integration around what we're doing, and we do need a great deal of consultation. We need new models, not just business models, but we need to look much more closely at new economic models like co-production. We need to look at citizen involvement. We need to look at how we can engage people in this change. All those things have come out. My apologies to those of my colleagues who have given me much longer lists, but I'm going to stick there, if I may. And are we taking questions from the floor, comments, conclusions I've missed, of which there will be an inordinately long list, I know. I take silence to mean that the sun is shining, that it's late in the afternoon, we've all been bombarded by information. We've all been on the optimism team, of which, again, I'm a relatively small part, and my colleagues have done far more work than I can claim any credit for. I mean, I think we have been an optimistic group of people who believe that this is not we recognize the enormity of the challenges we all face, but we do not believe it's totally intractable. We do think we're going to have to focus probably a lot more than we're currently doing on what is likely to provide benefits and be successful. But overall, I think we are an optimistic group of people. I think we're proud and pleased with what we've managed to produce. We hope the Commission are too. That may be the more acid test than what we think we've managed to do. And we are, as I've said, a very small part of an enormous raft of funded projects, many of which we've collaborated with. I think if I were offering one plea to anybody from the Commission who has any influence on, or anybody who has any influence on them, is sometimes one feels that with projects they do die a bit when they're finished. And yet all that information which projects have cumulatively contributed to the pool is there. There are lessons which come out by a concerted look across projects. So somebody needs to be doing that kind of cohesion work across projects, including our own. But thank you for being with us, and for those of you who have been on previous events and helped us, and a special thank you. Your input has allowed us to, I think, steer the project as it has gone along in very useful and helpful ways.
Sorry, if I can switch hats if there's still time, I would ask sort of one question that if I were sitting here as a journalist, I would put to you. I don't know if there's still a microphone.
I'm not concerned. I don't think.
It's just that we have a little more time, and no one is asking questions, so it's what I do for a living. I was just reading through, in preparing for this conference, I was reading through the summary of the conclusions of the various work packages, which was conveniently provided with the preparation, and it's just referred to as the brochure, but a couple of things struck me there. One in particular was in reference to work package 3. In work package 3, talking about demand and supply factors for passenger transport and mobility patterns. There is a reference there to, first of all, that EU sustainability policies, sustainable policies likely to be implemented by 2030 are only indirectly support co-modality, and co-modality is described as one of these very essential solutions for achieving a kind of sustainable mobility in the future in the European Union. That struck me as odd, that the European Union's own policies would only indirectly affect co-modality, which it in itself describes as a key priority in the white paper and whatnot. Anyway, and the other point I wanted to ask about, also that struck me as interesting, is the implementation of the optimism strategies and sustainable mobility policies would lead to a 7.5% increase in travel by public transport by road and rail, and travel by and travel by private cars and motorcycles would decrease by only 1.7%. That just doesn't sound like, even if all of these ambitious suggestions were implemented, this would be the result, a 1.7% decrease in usage of travel by private cars and motorcycles. And that CO2 emissions from transport would be decreased by 1.3% and total, and 1.9% by road passage. This doesn't sound like success on the scale that many people might be expecting. Were you surprised at these numbers? Do they seem modest to you, or do they seem, I guess, realistic?
Yeah. Actually, there is one important assumption behind these numbers, that we only tested what happens if we just implement these ICT solutions. Not any network improvements, not any vehicle technologies, not other, fuel technologies or other policies. Just personal travel information, integrated ticketing, and like car sharing, bike sharing, or demand responsive transport. So this 7% comes from these policies. Also, we had another variable, which is fuel prices. We had 4 scenarios. One is the more sustainable because the oil price is getting higher and we implement these policies. Then we can have some decrease in the passenger car share, and it's around 1.8, it's actually large. So one should read these results. These are the results of these ICT solutions, the impact. So one can also develop strategies, network improvements, and other, for example, speed limits or whatever, to promote sustainable mobility.
And what time horizon? Because I didn't
This
see
is
a time.
2030. We compared it with the European Commission reference scenario for 2030.
But besides these limits of the modeling and the strategies we looked on the ICT solutions, the lesson we can learn from this is that we have to put much more effort into our sustainability goals, not only defining the role of CO2 limitation, also we have to build a vision on how to reach this way, how to walk this way, and how to support it beside hoping for technology or ICT especially. So to me it was surprising. I personally would have expected more impact.
Yeah, that's what it is striking.
I mean, you say you're disappointed and surprised. I mean, I think we also ought to I think we also ought to remember that these are about policies which are about dynamic route planning, personalized travel information systems and so on. And these have been, one of the reasons for selecting these policies for deeper analysis has been that they ought to be fairly easy and cheap to implement. They don't require, they don't require us to do anything, say, to the physical infrastructure of streets or whatever. They're basically information policies. So, you know, a 7.5% increase in the use of public transport on that basis is certainly not in this to be ignored. I mean, we know the big hitting policies are going to be, I don't know, a shift to electric vehicles, for example, or regulating cities so that private vehicles can't be taken in and you have to use car sharing pools or other methods. I mean, we know those are going to be the big hitting policy, but the specific focus of optimism was on those. But it also actually allowed the team to develop a modeling technique which could be used to estimate the impact of other policies. So it wasn't just that we were looking at that, we were also looking at ways in which we could, if we had the data, to actually see what the impact of other policies might be.
Is this switched on? Yeah, I've heard quite a bit about sort of big hitting policies or major change today and where are the dramatic gains and so on. I just want to put a comment into the pool, which is that I don't think it's necessarily about dramatic change, big change, massive upheaval, fantastic new technologies. I think it is about marginal changes. And lots of marginal changes by lots of people add up to very significant change for the future of transport. In the same way that we know that just in terms of activity, 30 minutes of exercise a day, which shouldn't be too much for us, that small amount every day regularly is what adds up to a health benefit. In the same way, small changes in the way that we choose to travel and the way that the travel system is organised, these small changes of 3%, 5%, 7%, I think are fantastic, because all we actually need to tip the system from being oversaturated to managing to cope is something like a 5% change. So as long as these kinds of benefits are actually likely to be materialised and we've measured them correctly and they aren't just actually a statistical facet of sort of error and noise in the system, then I think actually there is optimism for the future. And I think that is where, certainly in the near term, that's where sustainability will come into the transport system. So my plea is that we'll look at all these marginal technologies and use them to use the advantage they've got for tailored solutions to bring about many changes in many people's transport choices.
Thank you. You got any more on your list?
Well, I do,
but I know I read them before. Shall we on that note close? Are you going to close for us, Elena?
Yes, I think the important
Thank you.
things will be sent, just some things like announcements. All presentation will be in our website, as already said by Terry, and also the videos of this event will be uploaded towards the end of this month. I would also say that outside of the room you will find a publication about national travel statistics that was derived from Optimist work. And at this point, I want to thank you all for your participation to our final event, which I hope has fulfilled your expectations and will stimulate further dialogue and stakeholder engagement for achieving sustainable mobility in our cities. Change to a sustainable mobility system does not happen in vacuum. It needs active participation and passion for it. Thank you all.